Has just gone on. That's awesome. So I am now going to turn this over to Tom to introduce the speaker for today.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Mary.
Morning, Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Good to see you all again, most of you. Bob Lawless is our speaker today. Bob is my dear friend and colleague at the university. He's the Max L. Rowe Professor at the University of Illinois College of Law. He and then Professor Elizabeth Warren at Harvard published a path-breaking article that was one of the first, if not the first article to use empirical studies to examine issues in bankruptcy. He and other distinguished bankruptcy scholars have organized a huge multi-year consumer bankruptcy study that is already producing significant results. Bob is a W of I graduate. He and his wife Patty have 3 children, all of whom are also University of Illinois graduates. This is Bob's 3rd talk to us. And thank you so much, Bob, for getting up, I know 2 or 3 hours before your accustomed time to talk to us. We're grateful. And please join me in welcoming Bob.
So thank you for having me, Tom. You know, I had to get, it's light out at 7 a.m. Did you know that? No, thank you for having me. So I can share my screen, I think, right? So let me do that. And so when Tom asked me to do this, there's a lot going on, and I thought what I'd do is kind of, I guess, reprise an interview I keep giving to different journalists. I just gave an interview to the AP earlier this week. So kind of this talk is basically conversations I've been having with journalists for the last probably 2 months. By the way, I find that when my phone is ringing as a journalist, it's not good for everyone because they only want to talk to the bankruptcy professor when things aren't going well. So that's what I'm going to do. So we kind of titled this talk, Bankruptcy Filings During COVID-19. The first thing I want to do before I kind of dive into the substance of what I've got to talk to you about, and it's actually not from my research. I want to talk about what's happening in the bankruptcy courts right now. But before we dive into that, I just thought a useful place to start is just to think about or to ask people what you think the best estimate is of people filing bankruptcy. And I like to do this just because I think sometimes, we think of the bankruptcy system or can think of the bankruptcy system as this backwater of the federal judiciary. So the best estimate of the number of Americans who file bankruptcy at some point in their lives, right? So of all the Americans walking around, what's the best estimate of people, the number of people who filed bankruptcy?
1 in 1,000.
100. 1 in 100.
150.
You're getting warmer.
1 in 500.
1 in 10.
Wow.
So I actually did this. I'll give you the blog link here at the end of the talk. We also run a blog called Credit Slips. Actually, now Senator Warren was one of our bloggers for many years until she went into, as I say, until she took her government job. You do some back of the envelope calculations about the number. We know the number of people who file. We know the number of husbands and wives that file. We know how many people repeat file, so you can back that number out. And we know how old people are when they file and average life expectancies and like that. And once you do all that, you come up with a number about 1 in 10 Americans who file bankruptcy at some point in their lives. So this is by far from a judicial backwater. It's the part of the federal court system that people are most likely to have contact with at some point in their lives. Just to give you a sense, right? So here are some social problems we think of as important. We put a lot of resources into persons diagnosed with breast cancer. Right here, you got gun injuries and deaths. Here's the number of people filing bankruptcy. So, not as big as some other problems that we might have, but a huge number of people filing bankruptcy each year, far outstripping the number of federal civil and criminal cases combined, right, even by a factor of several. So what has been happening in the bankruptcy filing rates? Things are really bad, right? So bankruptcy must be booming, bankruptcy courts must be crowded. Right? Well, surprise, that's not true. In fact, exactly the opposite has happened. So I found this in the Portland, Maine newspaper, where all the bankruptcy experts predicted. And I had to talk about this at least for a moment because I had to pat myself on the back because not all experts were predicting that, right? So I almost tweeted at them and said, not all, it didn't talk to the right experts because there hasn't been a surge in bankruptcy filings. In fact, bankruptcy filings are down and down dramatically. So this is the bankruptcy trend over time. And it's here starting in 2010 and then going through today. And you see, right, they've been going down fairly substantially since about 2010 on almost a secular trend here. You know, you see here peaks and valleys. So one little interesting thing is bankruptcies peak in the beginning of the year. You know, why is that? Because people have their income tax refunds and they can pay their lawyer. So what happened this year, right? So this is about February and March, and then bankruptcies have just plummeted since then. And here's year-over-year changes for March to August of this year, right? So March 2020, August 2020 is compared to a year ago. So we've got total bankruptcy filings. I've got Chapter 7 filings, which are the liquidation bankruptcy. About 2/3 of bankruptcy filings are Chapter 7 bankruptcies, where you file, you turn over your assets to the trustee. 95% of people have no assets to turn over, but that's what Chapter 7 is. And in the end of the process, you get a discharge of forgiveness of your debts. Chapter 13, you file, you pay, you don't have to turn over assets. So that's why people might choose Chapter 13 because they have assets they would otherwise lose in a Chapter 7, but you have to pay your income over 3 to 5 years. And you get your discharge at the end of the 3 to 5 years. So this is a little bit more burdensome because you've got to pay income for 3 to 5 years, but you know, it protects your assets. So what do we see here in terms of the filing, right? So COVID starts to hit here in March, right? Have partial effects in March. Bankruptcies go down. Right? In April, they were almost 50% down. And since then, pretty consistently, they've been between 30 to 40% decline in the number of people filing bankruptcy on a year-over-year basis. The headline suggested this took a lot of experts by surprise, not all experts, but a lot of experts. I mean, I think the easy prediction was that economic times are bad, so bankruptcy filings are going to go up. There are reasons that this didn't happen that I'll talk about at the end of the talk. So geographically, it was also kind of interesting where these bankruptcy filings are. So you are the first people seeing this map. I put this together for this talk. I think I'm going to post it on the blog here either tomorrow or over the weekend. So these are declines in bankruptcy filings. This is the year-over-year decline from the graph I just showed you. So this is this decline just mapped across the United States. The divisions are the federal judicial districts. So here in Illinois, we have 3 judicial districts. Some states don't have separate judicial districts, just the whole state, right? So darker red, bigger declines. The lighter, I don't know what that is, a tan, right? Those are smaller declines. So they've been concentrated. Where are the declines? Well, in Georgia, Louisiana, those are big Chapter 13 places. The rates of Chapter 13 vary widely. So before the pandemic, as many as 70 to 80% of bankruptcies were Chapter 13s in these districts. I think those are a little bit more discretionary, perhaps. And so we see bigger declines. And then the other thing that was really interesting to me about this map is the other decline is up here in the Northeast corridor, as well as, you know, in Pennsylvania. Chicago was down a lot. I think that's also a Chapter 13 effect. Chicago's a big Chapter 13 district. So it was interesting to me that these declines are concentrated in the Northeast corridor. The AP reporter asked me about that. She said, why? And here is my answer. I don't know. I don't know if this were COVID restrictions and people couldn't get to lawyers' offices. I don't know if this is foreclosure and rent eviction moratoria, although we have those elsewhere. So this was just interesting that we see this concentration. It could all just be random coincidence, right? That they all just happen to be up there. Locally, what's happening? So we're in the Central District of Illinois is our federal judicial district. So what we're seeing in Central Illinois is pretty much right where we were last year. So in 2019, there were 5,000 bankruptcy filings in this district alone. 20.7% of those were Chapter 13s. Right? So here are the declines, down about 50% on Chapter 13s, down about 27% on Chapter 7s. And the national figures, the declines in Chapter 13s are much bigger than the declines in Chapter 7s, right? So what we're seeing here in Central Illinois is very similar to what we're seeing nationally. So you say to me, okay, so these are individual bankruptcies, right? So what, the Chapter 7s, Chapter 13s, those are individuals. What about businesses? Those are Chapter 11s. So you see all these sorts of headlines, right? So the Wall Street Journal, I admit I was a little lazy. I just used the May headlines because I already had this slide, right? You see headlines like this each month. Business bankruptcies are rising, right? This is the American Bankruptcy Institute. This pains me because they should know better. I'm involved with them. Reuters, right? Bankruptcy filings surge. That turns out to be, I think the lawyer word for it is a lie, false. So big corporations have lots of subsidiaries, and every subsidiary gets counted as a Chapter 11. So just kind of as a visual here, these are the 104 subsidiaries of Le Pan Quotidien, which is a restaurant chain that filed bankruptcy. Now, if you look down this list, it looks like each one of their restaurants was basically its own corporation, big company. So when they filed, each one of these cases got counted as a separate Chapter 11. So you had 104 Chapter 11s, you had one economic unit, but 104 Chapter 11s, and these headlines are keyed off of that. So if you do the hard work of backing out, right, you have to individually look at court dockets and say, okay, right, and just here's 104, they're all the same case, and back them out. Being a lazy man, I didn't do that, but a gentleman named Ed Flynn at the American Bankruptcy Institute has. And Ed has kindly shared his data with me. And when you back out those data, Chapter 11 filings are down slightly, right, from in comparable year-over-year basis, 1,133 in 2019, 974 right now. If you do the math, that's about a 14% decline. So Chapter 11s are down a little bit, contrary to the headlines. And again, those are just artifacts of counting all these different corporate subsidiaries. The one place where Chapter 11s have boomed, and the one reason I think a lot of people think that bankruptcies are booming, is that they have actually gone up when you're talking about large corporate Chapter 11s. So, right, so this database counts a large Chapter 11 as anything over $310 million in assets for boring reasons I'm happy to talk about in the Q&A. But right, so here, right, you see, right, a huge increase in big Chapter 11s. So the companies that are making the big headlines that you're seeing, right, the Hertz's, the retailers, these are the big Chapter 11s. Those have boomed. There has been a big increase of this. And of course, right, these smaller Chapter 11s, they're important. Of course, these cases can have huge economic effects because they affect so many people. So the last thing I want to talk about is why. So why, contrary to all instinct, has bankruptcy declined? And what I tell the reporters always is the first principle is bankruptcy is a legal decision that wipes out your past debts. It does not get you a job. It does not put money in your pocket. Bankruptcy wipes out your past debts. It fixes some of your problems, but it won't wipe out all of your problems. So, sometimes I think there's this mistake that people think of the bankruptcy filing rate as some one-to-one marker of the economy. It's not. We've had bankruptcies boom in good economic times. We've had bankruptcies decline in bad economic times. So we shouldn't think that, well, the economy's bad, therefore bankruptcies are going to go up. A related point is just because bankruptcies are down doesn't mean people aren't financially hurting. The other reason, another reason is that people struggle a long time before they file bankruptcy. So this actually is from our research. So we've been asking people for a very long time, before you file bankruptcy, how long did you seriously struggle with your debts? And you see, well, you see two things. So this is first got two waves of our surveys, the current wave and then a 2007 wave. And so the time that people report has been going up. And you see here, the most common responses are really more than 2 years, more than 50%. By the time you add those two numbers together, you're really almost talking 70% of people, just about 2/3 really, say that they financially struggled for more than 2 years before they filed bankruptcy. You don't lose your job on Monday and file bankruptcy on Tuesday. Contrary to a lot of popular stories, the people who arrive in bankruptcy court arrive there after a long, arduous process. Most people filing bankruptcy are not just, deadbeats trying to run away from their debts. They're in deep financial holes with serious problems. So I think, a big part of the answer here is, people may be struggling financially, but they're not running to bankruptcy court today. I think another thing that's probably going on is people have a lot of things going on in their lives. As I tell the reporters, if you've got children, you're trying to make sure that they're able to sit in front of the computer to go to school. You're trying to have your own issues with the job and all like that. Seeing a bankruptcy lawyer is probably just further down on the priority list, right? You may have debt problems, but fixing those debt problems is just a lower priority. Certainly, and a lot of people want to say, well, what about the foreclosure and eviction moratorium? And I think they're playing a role. But I think like many things, the answers here, the reasons are multiple. And the foreclosure and eviction moratorium are playing a role, but they're by far from the only reason we've seen this decline. So I think thinking about the future, this is the next question I get asked. So I'm going through the interviews I give. You're not asking me questions yet, but this is the reporter. The next thing they'll always ask, so what's going to happen in the future? And first thing I say, it's really easy to make predictions here, right? We had this headline, where are all the bankruptcies experts predict, and I think you get a call, other experts get calls from reporters. The trite, easy thing to say is, oh, bankruptcies will spike. And I think you've got to be very modest. We're in unprecedented times. Past returns are no guarantee of future performance here. Past statistics aren't going to necessarily tell us what's going to happen. I think there's probably going to be a gradual rise, right? So get my pen here, we get, what we had a bankruptcy system that was kind of like this with the filing rate. It went down, and now we're kind of like this. So the first thing, I think we're going to start to see a rise, but that just gets us back to baseline. I don't think we're going to see a big sudden rise here, but I think what we're going to see is just more of just a gradual rise in bankruptcies in the coming years, right? As the people's financial problems continue to mount, and you think about that 2-year tail that a lot of people arriving in bankruptcy court have been dealing with problems to 2 to 5 years. So I think what you're going to see is just kind of this just gradual run up in bankruptcy filings. I'm not certain of this. I can tell you some countervailing stories. There's less household debt. So if you go look at the Federal Reserve statistics, there's actually less household debt right now on household balance sheets. Government moratoria on foreclosures, on evictions may continue. There may be some more government programs that bring some relief. So I don't think it's certain we're going to see this increase, but I think that's the most likely. So I'll stop there and ask if any of you have any questions, thoughts, and I'll also stop sharing. And just.
I have a question.
Yes.
With bankruptcy filings, I understand that personal and business, I guess the problems go away, financial problems go away. But I'm just wondering if a person has got federal, state, or local city financial problems with owing taxes and everything. Do those go away too? So how does it work?
Yeah, so there's actually two parts of that, right? So do people's problems go away, and then specifically on the taxes. So one of the things we find in our research actually is people's problems don't go away. One of my former researchers used to say, you know, about a third of the people get through bankruptcy just fine. You know, about a third struggle, and another third, you know, their financial situation is hopeless even after the bankruptcy case. We recently did a study about car loans in bankruptcy, and 2/3 of the people are emerging from bankruptcy with the same car loan, the same sort of car debt that's not helping them really, or not helping them keep their cars in bankruptcy. So this idea that, you know, bankruptcy wipes away your debts, it's certainly, you know, on the books, that's what happens, supposed to happen. In the world, it doesn't actually end up working that cleanly. And then tax debts specifically. So the answer is it depends on the tax. So for income taxes, bankruptcy doesn't eliminate taxes within the last 3 years of your income taxes. That's only if you, and it will wipe away older tax debt that's older than 3 years, but only if you file the return.
I see.
You see these cases, you know, people didn't file returns, those taxes are not going to get wiped away in bankruptcy. But generally speaking, for income taxes in the last 3 years don't get eliminated, but older taxes do.
So a couple of things. First of all, commentary. It's interesting that we have a lawyer with his last name Lawless.
People remember me. It's my only asset.
Yeah, well, we used to have a member in our club named Dick Justice who was in charge of discipline at the U of I. So I always thought that was interesting. But anyhow, two questions. One is we didn't have a breakdown on age groups in terms of if there's any stats talking about or looking at age groups in bankruptcies. And also the correlation between divorce and bankruptcies.
Yeah, so age groups and divorce. So let me talk about divorce. So just yesterday, I was actually crunching some numbers on our research for a new paper we're working on, and yeah, there's no question that people who file divorce continue to be kind of a distinct subgroup of bankruptcy filers. It kind of traditionally is considered one of the big three reasons that people file bankruptcy. And, you know, these reasons overlap, right? You know, job loss, medical, or divorce are kind of the big three reasons. And that continues to be true. I can't really put a number on it because it's all, these reasons often overlap. Yeah, there's no question that divorce is a big driver. And then in terms of age groups, so the last time you had me talk was about that, our research on that. And if I can share my screen again, I tell my students, I said, there's a lot of bad things about the pandemic and teaching, but one of the things is when I get asked a question, I got the issue on my computer, I can show you. So here's age groups of bankruptcy filers. So maybe better is the table. This was part of a paper we called The Grain of Bankruptcy. So in 1991, 2.1% of bankruptcy filers were over the age of 65, and now it's 12.2%. Younger filers seem to not be as prevalent. These data go through 2016. I haven't fully run all the numbers since 2016, but I'd be really surprised if it's changed. So, yeah, so actually when we published this paper got a lot of attention. 1 in 8 people filing bankruptcy are over the age of 65. This is a lot of people starting their retirement years with, you know, not with a nice pension, not with, you know, a nice retirement ahead of them, but starting off with the bankruptcy. And, you know, maybe when you're in your 30s or 40s and you're filing bankruptcy and you've got a few decades of earning power ahead of you to climb out of that financial hole, that's one thing. When you're 65 plus and you're filing bankruptcy, your ability to dig out of that financial hole is much less. So yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. I've got a quick question. I'm in the engineering field, and for the most part, we've been doing very well this year. We have a lot of municipal clients, but we have a wary eye to the future. We continue to be told 2021 is when the sales tax revenue for these municipalities is really going to drop based on this year. And so we might be seeing a situation where more and more people are getting jobs and doing better, but those that depend upon government services are just going to be devastated. So I'm wondering if there might be some type of spike in bankruptcies that don't make sense with the economy in 2021. When people are going back to work, we've got no municipal services.
Yeah, maybe, right? And so this is part of my long tail story, right? So if people start having problems next year, then I would expect those problems to show up in the bankruptcy system two or 3 years down the road. Right? So again, if people lose their job next March, I don't expect them to be filing bankruptcy in April. Right? I expect that to happen in March of 2023 would be about, we're going to see this. So this is my long tail story. So that's why I keep telling reporters, I think this is going to be the bankruptcy system. This is going to be a long tail. But the other thing is bankruptcy only gets rid of your debt, right? So if people aren't able to borrow, they're going to be hurting financially. They're just not going to be showing up in bankruptcy court. So one of the things I always like to try to emphasize is I actually have only a piece of the economic pie here, right? And the people with the economic problems that end up in bankruptcy court. So, it could be that we have problems next year, but people aren't borrowing or aren't able to borrow because creditors won't extend credit. That'll actually accelerate the bankruptcy rate because people will have to file bankruptcy to deal with their financial problems. They won't be able to put the groceries or whatever on a credit card bill. But, it could be if we're not having more debt, we don't have more bankruptcies. But I think the likely scenario is, yeah, exactly what you're talking about. We have problems in the next year, but then that's going to even push a bankruptcy wave. I like the word wave rather than spike, is what you're going to see. Right? It's going to be an increase, but it's going to come like the tide coming in.
Professor, you mentioned earlier that you said people's problems don't go away, and gave out 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 people struggle, 1/3 people improve, and 1/3 people get.
Well, I mean, it was more that 1/3 of the people were already on the path to solving their problems. They needed bankruptcy, but they would have been fine maybe without the bankruptcy. And another third, right? Bankruptcy's doing a work for about the middle third. And I don't want you to take that too seriously. It was just kind of a rubric, right? I think, there's this idea that people walk into bankruptcy and they're magically cleansed. Like a lot of debts still hang around, right? Tax debts, we've already talked about. Student loans generally still hang around. Student loans are the biggest piece of the consumer debt pie right now, other than home mortgages. So consumer debt, student loans hang around. If you've got a car, right, the car lenders, we're not fixing that problem. We're the tools to deal with an underwater home mortgage. So if home prices go down, the bankruptcy system is not going to be as useful. I just wanted to address the idea that bankruptcy on the books, and certainly what you see, the ads on late night TV, all your problems are going to go away. It's doesn't quite work that way. There's a lot of people who, bankruptcy helps. I don't want to be heard to say, it doesn't do anything. But it's not this like cleansing of all debts for everyone.
For the most part, it's credit card debt.
Not so much. One of the things, yes, right. So for some people, so actually this paper we're working on, I mentioned I was crunching numbers for, is about how there's many different types of bankruptcy filers, and there are credit card debt bankruptcy filers, there are car loan bankruptcy filers, there are home mortgage bankruptcy filers. There's different what we're calling portraits of bankruptcy filers. Bankruptcy is probably most effective to get rid of your credit card debt, but there's a lot of people that come into bankruptcy with not a lot of credit card debt.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
In line with what you were just talking about, you said earlier that generally household debt is down right now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And I assume you have a breakdown of the types of household debt. For example, medical versus, as you say, car loans, student loans, that kind of thing. So can you see what specific part of household debt is down the most?
Yeah, so that's actually not, so that's just Federal Reserve data.
Okay.
So for the Federal Reserve each month, it releases a statistical release called the G19. And it actually does not break it down as finely as you were suggesting. So it gives you what they call revolving debt, which is mainly credit card debt, non-revolving debt, which is mainly auto loans. You can get, it tracks student loans, it tracks motor vehicle loans. Revolving debt is down the most. Credit card debt is down the most. Some people are saying, well, that was because people used their CARES Act payments to pay down debt.
Okay.
Some anecdotal evidence that that's true, but haven't seen anything systematic. Some of this may be some bookkeeping, if you will, as banks charge off old debt. The amount of outstanding debt will go down just because it's the way the Federal Reserve gathers the data. So that's when I see household debt is down, I'm referring to that Federal Reserve release. So if people are really interested, Federal Reserve G19 will get you that information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got a question. When we had the financial meltdown in 2008, did our population and the banks learn a lesson from that as far as not, straining themselves financially so much?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think so. What we saw in the aftermath of the Great Recession was a lot of house debt, right? And so yeah, I don't think we have that problem as much. So my big concern right now is the business side, the Chapter 11 side. There's a lot of borrowing in the early part of this year. This wasn't my quote. I just saw this yesterday. So it's talked about the debt having to work its way through the snake. And I thought that was a great way to put it because there's a lot of borrowing in the early part of this year, and so I think on the corporate side, that's what probably worries me the most. You ask about learning lessons.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not so much, but on the other hand, these are not naive financial institutions that are extending these loans, so I'm not too concerned for them. They know the risks they're taking when they make these loans to these big companies in the early part of this year.
Okay.
If I could, I'm going to end the meeting here, and if anybody else has further questions, if our guests would stay around for just a few moments to see if there's more questions, that would be wonderful. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we will kind of close up the meeting here today. All right, and we play. All right, so
let's give a hand to Mr. Lawless.
Oh, definitely.
Happy to do it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Our speaker for next week is Sarah Lifesafe, the Executive Director of Grand Prairie Friends. Andrew will be introducing her. And so I'm going to go ahead and do the four-way test for us all today of the things we think and say and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendship? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And is it fun? And on that note, I will officially end the meeting for today. Thank you all for coming. And like I said, if you can hang around a little bit and want to ask some more questions, that would be awesome. Oops,
thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.